Okay, well, hello everybody out there at home and everybody here at the actual boot camp. We are doing Novice Boot Camp for 2017-2018, and those of you who are watching it, we're going to kind of ignore you from now on, but this is important that you're watching it, so I'm going to talk to the camera first because I'm going to be talking to the real people here after that. But basically what we are doing tonight is we are trying to sort of lay out our expectations and understanding of what IPDA Debate at Mississippi State is, and we're kind of trying to build sort of our brand and build our expectations in the circuit and here at Mississippi State. And part of doing that is making sure that we're all on the same page as to what it means to do good quality IPDA debate. And so in roughly, excuse my voice, in roughly about an hour and a half tonight, that is what we're going to cover. So if you are somehow watching this later, that is what this is. It's mainly intended for novices, but I think it will be valuable for varsity people as well, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page. Questions are welcome. In fact, we need questions. If I'm not clear, let me know. And I guess the main thing we need to do is get the camera going. So there we go. So we're going to be doing this mainly through PowerPoint slides. We may pick it up and do some stuff on the board. But yeah, that's what we're doing. So hopefully this will be useful to you. Okay, now having talked to all the imaginary people out there at home who might think somebody be watching this, thank you all for coming tonight. What we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to kind of try to make sure that we are all on the same page. We do a lot of practices, and we all, we have a lot of very good debaters who've won in their own sort of individual ways, but what we've never really done is gotten together and said, here is sort of the standard template. Like here, yeah, come on in, no problem. Here is sort of the standard template. Here's what we expect, in terms of the basics out of all Mississippi State debaters in IPDA. So that is what tonight is about. We're going to go through all the stuff that you've seen before, stuff that I've talked about, starting from preparation at the very. We're basically going to walk through the entire round from strikes all the way through the final rebuttal, and kind of talk about some other things about how we get to be good debaters in that process. So, but my hope is that everybody will walk out of here saying, okay, now I know exactly what the basic standards are, exactly what I need to be doing debate the Mississippi State way. Because, I don't want it to be too hokey, but, when you go and see Union University debate, they're the national champions, for those of you who don't know. There is a Union, yeah, I know, right, exactly, but they're good people. But there is a Union University way to debate. And I don't want to copy them. I want to copy some of the things they do because they're very good and they're very effective. There's some things I'd like to do differently, but I want to make sure that we all have that message. So, with that, let's get started. So the first thing you need to understand about debate, and Georgie can tell you this because she was on the high school team with me, is one of the first things I tend to say to people is, debate is a game, okay? And that's the first thing you have to understand. You have to demystify it, right? You can't think of debate as being, this sort of mysterious, hard to understand, hard to get your arms around thing. It's simply a game, and it's a game where the object is to get the judge to write your name and code in the box that says winner on the ballot. That's really what it is. People talk about, for example, the analogy of football. People talk about football like it's in baseball, especially baseball. They tend to romanticize it and talk about it, all this sort of, romantic historical stuff about it. But really, the object of baseball is to make a man run across home plate more times than your opponent makes a man run across home plate, right? And when you boil it down to that, that really kind of distills it. So the object of the game is to get the judge to write your name and code in the box marked winner on the ballot. And when you distill it to that, that will help you focus and understand all of the other stuff we're going to say, right? It will demystify it. It will take all the mysterious aspects away from it. So think about it in those terms. We are trying to get our name in the right box on the ballot. Whatever achieves that goal within the bounds of ethics and decency is good debating, right? Now that doesn't mean that you can go in there and be a total nihilist, right? That you can go in there and sort of ignore, basic, grammar and human decency. There's an event for that. It's called policy debate. But we don't do that kind of debate, right? So whatever you can do within the bounds of ethics and basic decency is good debate. Ethics and basic decency are important. We have a reputation that we carry with us. We don't want to be the team that people look at and think that we are trying to sort of borderline cheat. If you read some of the journals from IPDA, they have their own sort of journal for the league that different people write in. you'd be amazed at how much back and forth they write in this sort of scholarly journal about how so-and-so, 8 years ago did this and didn't disclose in one round. This is like a published scholarly journal, right? Where they're talking about, Trey Jones, well, not Trey, but whatever, some person, did this, and that's how disclosure got started, and we do it because this person's a scumbag. But we don't want that to be the case, right? We want to be ethical, and we want to be decent. We also want to win. But like I said, sports analogy, the winner of the football game is the one that puts the ball in the end zone, right? However you do it within the bounds of the rules. So demystify it. Don't think it's too difficult to do or to understand. Our judges are human beings, okay? That's the first thing you have to remember. All of our judges, before they're anything else, are human beings, unless they let knowledge judge, which they may. But if they don't let knowledge judge, then all of our judges are going to be human beings, okay? And they respond favorably to things that human beings like, and unfavorably to things that human beings don't like. The reason I mention this is that as you get more experienced in debate, if you've done it in high school, if you've done it with us for a long time, you tend to think of judges solely in terms of things like their judging paradigm. Are they flowing or not flowing? Do they vote for certain types of arguments? Do they not vote for them? Are they a theory judge? Are they a judge that votes for critiques? I know we don't really do those in IPDA, thank goodness. But you think of them in those terms. But I strongly encourage you to remember that the first thing that judges are is human beings, right? And you're going to have an easier time getting a human being to write your name in the winner box if they like you, right? If they think you're an ethical, decent person and not a smarmy jerk, okay? So the first thing, I think the first part of our brand is basically, let's not be jerks, right? Uh-oh, hold on, 1 second, I gotta get this. Hey, I'm doing a practice, I gotta go, okay? No, soap will probably do it, maybe some food to eat. Okay, love you, Bob. Anyway, but they're human beings, right? They have families that call them about groceries, right? It happens. All things being equal, judges might tell you they voted off some theoretical point or some flow point, but I will tell you I've judged enough rounds to know that there comes a point in many rounds where somebody makes me just not like them enough. I'm going to find a way to vote against them. Because, I hate to say that, but I'm probably the flowiest of the flow judges, right? But even I, if you cross a certain threshold with me, can find a legitimate reason on the flow to vote against you. Chad, would you agree?
I would totally agree.
I will find a reason to vote against you. And if I will do that, then just imagine what some random college professor or college student will do. They'll gladly throw your mountain of evidence out the window if they perceive you as being, boorish, a bully, a jerk,
or an a-hole.
Or an a-hole, or any other number of things that we could describe you as, right? So remember they're human beings and treat them that way first. Treat them with respect and try to please them. They're the boss. They're not judges because they're flawless. In fact, you might say they're flawless because they're judges, right? Their word is final because they're the judge. They're not the judge because their word is final, you see? So, treat them with respect. Not cloying, we'll talk about what it means to not be cloying and to not be too cute by half, but with respect, okay? However, many of our judges also come from debate backgrounds, which means that in addition to them being human beings, they have an overlay beyond that where they have certain preferences that come from the world of debate, right? And you need to understand at least some of what those preferences look like. You need to understand what I mean when I say a flow judge versus a lay judge, right? You need to understand what I mean by when I say a judge that will vote, when we talk about judges that will vote for kind of crazy stuff versus judges who are sort of more straight down the middle, okay? And that all comes from, in order for you to understand their background in debate and what we call debate theory, you have to get a basic passing understanding of debate theory. Now, you're not going to get that tonight. We are not going to walk out of this round talking about how do you respond to an aspect plan theory spike, because we don't use those in IPDA. We don't even have to worry about that. But we do need to understand the basics of where they're coming from so that we can make them happy by catering to their understanding of what debate is, okay? That's another thing. So, to win the game of debate, though, we combine a few things. We want to combine likability with evidence, reason, and an understanding of the theory behind competitive debate. So in other words, being a nice person, combine that with evidence. We are always going to use evidence. We are always going to rely on it because it cuts the Gordian knot. It makes back and forth, yin yang, he said, she said, into a very simple, easy to win point. We're also going to use reason, though. We're not going to walk in and just hide behind our evidence, without listening critically to what the other side is saying. We're going to use logic, because judges love logic. I mean, judges in IPDA, that's part of what this is about. Like, if you want to do nothing but evidence, again, policy debate is out there, that's nothing but reading evidence. I mean, I don't want to belittle it too much. It does have very smart and logical people, but tons of evidence. IPDA is just as much about a clever turn of phrase, a clever turn of logic, a quick realization about what your opponents are saying. Give you an example. Well, and I'll give you an example in a second. And also understanding what the theory of competitive debate is. Let me give you an example from a debate tournament I was judging a couple of weeks ago. The high school resolution right now in public forum has to do with putting missile defense systems in South Korea. And this team, one of the high schools in Mississippi, ran this very sort of elaborate argument about how if you put these missile defense systems, they'll shoot down satellites and create space junk, and the space junk will start wars, and the wars will start economic collapse, right? And their evidence was sketchy, it was weak, right? But it was this very long chain of inferences and links that they did in the debate, right? And the team that debated against them said, well, hold on, the resolution asks if we should put these missile launchers in South Korea, right? And they said, that's right. And so, if I understand correctly, satellites orbit around the Earth, right? And they said, yes, they do. So, these missile launchers, they already exist, right? We're not debating about whether they should exist. We're debating about whether they should go in one particular spot, South Korea, right? So, yes, okay. So, if we're worried about them shooting down satellites, can't they also shoot down satellites from like Japan or Guam or California where they currently are? And they're like, oh, well, I don't think they could. Well, why not? Well, they're pretty sure they could, right? And so the argument was lost because somebody was thinking logically enough to go, wait a minute, we're not debating about whether to have missile launchers. We're debating about whether to put them in a certain place. And if they're shooting down things up in space that are orbiting, they should be able to do that from anywhere, right? It's that kind of thinking on your feet and being a logical person that is rewarded in IPDA debate, okay? All right, so debate is a game. This is how we play it. So how do we want to be likable? That's principle number one, is we're going to try to be likable. It should be easy, hopefully. It should be easier than what we're about to do. If it's not, then I understand. I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit of a bear. I was a little bit difficult in high school debate. I got better in college because I had to. So I don't see any of you guys as being that way, but it's hopefully this is the falling off log part, but if not, we may have to work on it. So the first thing is, don't be imperious or presumptuous. The judge is doing you a favor by being here, right? They do not have to be here. They are here either because they are judging for their team or they've come here out of the goodness of their heart to judge for the school. So you'll see a lot of debaters that come from high schools that will use very presumptuous tones. Like, when they ask the judge ready, they'll be, is my judge ready? I mean, they'll kind of talk down to them. They'll say phrases like, okay, in today's debate, you're going to be voting AF, and let me tell you why. Okay, well now in the world of debate, if you've been doing this for a long time, the phrase "you're going to be voting AF," you probably will read that. It's not as disrespectful in the world of like hardcore debate. It's not meant to be. But to anybody who's not in that world, like saying "here's what you're going to be doing," right, is incredibly presumptuous, right? So you're saying, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, using a lot of jargon, things like that, being condescending to your opponent. Those, unfortunately, are kind of accepted in some realms of high school debate. IPDA is going to punish you for that. It just is, okay? You have to learn to be assertive and be clear without being a jerk, without talking down to people. Instead of saying you're going to be voting, you say, let me give you 3 reasons why I think you'll be very comfortable today voting for the negative. Or let me give you 3 reasons why you're going to have a very clear conscience this afternoon if you vote for the negative. So you can do whatever you want, but don't tell them this is what you're going to be doing. Don't talk down to your opponent. Don't be imperious or presumptuous, okay? Don't be angry or belligerent. Treat your opponent with respect. Look, these rounds usually, there's 30 minutes to prepare for it. This is not like a policy round where you're going to have so much evidence that you just have to speed through it and talk over your opponent, and shout them down. You don't really have to do that in policy, but some people feel that you do, right? But certainly in a round where you have 30 minutes to prepare, where the vast majority of debates come down to like 2 points, right? Maybe 3, right? There's more time than you need in an IPDA debate. There just really is for the amount of stuff we're going to cover. So there's no need to be hostile or belligerent. You can let you don't have to shout your opponent down in cross-sects. Now there might be a few opponents who will try to run over you in this league, but for the most part, if you come off as being controlled and restrained, if they're the one, getting hot under the collar, if they're the one raising their voice, that's good. You want to come off as being very restrained. Treat them with respect, even if they don't treat you with respect. You need to expect at a tournament you're going to get somebody who is just a little bit of a sociopath. And here's the thing. There's a 50-50 chance that you can get that in our league, you can get a judge to vote for you just because you're nice and they're a real jerk. It's absolutely, you'll win one round every other tournament. It's a coin flip, right? If you can just be, you have to do a decent job, but if you do a decent job and you're nice and they're a jerk, you will pick up a ballot for free, okay, at every other tournament or so. Like every 10th round, it's like, getting your card stamped at Subway or whatever, right? Every 10th round, you will get a free win if you can be nice and efficient and somebody else is a jerk, okay? Don't be a faux intellectual. Speak plainly and clearly. There are no bonus points for using big words. You notice that when I spend a lot of money on a very expensive education, and I hope you notice that I don't make a point of trying to use big words, right? I guess I did put imperious up there, but that's still, that's a 10-cent word, not a 25% word, 25-cent word. But don't be a faux intellectual. Speak plainly. When we're saying that, when we're talking about our impact at the end of a round, what we should sound like is, in this debate, I've shown you that if we affirm, what we're going to see is 10,000 more deaths per year as a result of cancer in the United States. That's a very simple, straightforward reason why you can be comfortable voting for the affirmative, right? You don't have to do any high-flown, great debaters, rhetorical stuff where you pound the lectern. That's not what we do. We speak plainly and clearly. We look the judge in the eye and we say, you can vote for the affirmative because the affirmative has shown through clear evidence that has not been refuted that we're going to save 10,000 more lives due to cancer screenings every single year in the United States. And that by itself is more than enough reason to cast your ballot for the affirmative. That's what a good IPDA debater sounds like. It's not, and does my opponent realize the perfidy that he, that's not what it is, okay? For those of you who are new, there's nothing like that. So we don't do that kind of stuff. Don't be too shy. You have to be outgoing enough. This is kind of counterbalancing with don't be belligerent, but you have to say what you mean with assurance. You need to get rid of the phrase I think or I believe or anything like that from your vocabulary. You're speaking from evidence, right? And if you're not speaking from evidence, then the judge is just going to assume that this is what you believe. You don't have to tell them that this is what you believe. You don't have to qualify it and say, you don't have to put weasel words and qualifiers on it and say, well, I sort of think, and that kind of thing. At the beginning of your speech, acknowledge that your opponent gave a really good speech and we've got some really good clash, but I think I win, and here's why, right? That's the respect that you show. Don't be shy about it. Be nice and be reasonable, but say what you mean. Say it with assurance. Look the judge in the eye. Stand up straight. By the way, in terms of delivery, I don't talk about this a lot, but when you are doing a delivery, you could be in all different kinds of rooms, right? You could be in a room where you're behind a lectern like this, okay? If you're behind a lectern, plant those feet, put your arms at your side, hold it up, you can put your, notepad down in front of you, and speak. If you have to come over to a table like this, which you very well may, right, in many rounds, you can either hold it right here or you can put it down and look down at it. But again, plant those feet, right? Don't pace back and forth. Don't sway back and forth. Don't have your arms floating around doing nervous things and playing with them like this. Don't do that. Put your hands at your side or hold the pad. Most people will just hold the pad up and speak from the pad, right? Plant those feet shoulder width apart and speak, right? Just be confident in the way you stand and the way you hold yourself. Pacing, bad. Fidgeting, bad. Standing with your feet set, holding the legal pad with your other arm at your side or gesturing, good. It conveys confidence. That's what we want to do. Let's also be knowledgeable. It's very important to be a knowledgeable, right now what we're talking about is knowledgeable about how the round works, how the event works. Now, let me just say before we get to that, IPDA Debate absolutely rewards good, well-rounded general knowledge, okay? If whereas policy debate is going to reward you doing an incredibly deep dive into one thing for the entirety of the school year, IPDA Debate is going to reward people who are reading the news and maybe reading some articles about economics and philosophy and history just every day, making it a little bit of a habit, right? People who are well-rounded and well-read and who learn how stuff works and who are able to explain it. That's the people who are going to be rewarded in IPDA. Not just the specific things that are going on now, not just the nya back and forth in the news cycle of, Trump throwing paper towels or whatever it is today, right? But also understanding concepts. So when you take, if you want to be a good IPDA debater, when you take microeconomics, right, you actually need to understand what the concept of marginal utility means. Because marginal utility actually has a bearing on how we talk about what makes the world better. It allows you to make an argument about why helping the poor is, from a mathematical perspective, better than helping the rich. And if you don't understand, I'm supposed to give the camera to Luke since I will see him tomorrow. Well, there you go. So, okay. There you go. Got a text there. He just but yeah, I mean, so understanding concepts like that and being able, understanding what a social contract is and what it is, understanding, ideas like what is a categorical imperative, what is a veil of ignorance. We're not going to use those nearly as much as we did in Lincoln Douglas in high school if you did that, but understanding those concepts is going to give you evidence to ammunition to argue from. So that's a little bit of an aside, but what this is about is being knowledgeable about how the round works. And for you, those of you who are varsity and you've done this before, this will be very much a recap. But for those of you who are going for the first time to this tournament or going to one later in the semester, it is very important that we don't want to be, come on in, no problem. We don't want to be the team where people are walking into the round at the first tournament and saying, now how many minutes do I have to speak? No, let's not do that, okay? I know we're new, and I know that, we haven't been doing this long, but you don't want to be the person who's asking how much time you have, who's asking your opponent how to do things. It's not the end of the world. They won't set you on fire. They won't laugh at you. But it does suggest a lack of professionalism and a lack of preparation. So I want us all to know the basics, right? So that means we need to know things about how to strike topics. We need to know how to use our prep time. We need to know what disclosure is. We need to know what the speech times are and what they do. Cross-examination and some basic debate terms, right? We need to be literate in all these concepts so that we don't sound like the noobs, right, when we come in, even if we are the noobs, because everybody's a noob at some point. That's how, that's anything, not just in debate. So we want to be knowledgeable. You won't know everything at your first tournament, but try not to make it obvious that you're totally new, right? Try to know your times, right? Try to know basic terminology. We'll talk about that. So what we want to do to learn those is I want to walk chronologically through a round in a pretty good bit of depth. Like kind of go pretty slow and make sure we get through the whole thing. And again, if there are questions, especially from the new folks, please ask them, because there really aren't any dumb questions, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is not really common sense. It's just arbitrary rules that our league made up. So there's no reason, Georgia, even you, there's no reason, even if you've debated before, that you should know this stuff, right? So that's why we're doing this, okay? So ask, because I will probably gloss over something. And varsity people, if you hear something that I'm glossing over, stop me and let's slow down, okay? So, the basic overview. We're going to, basically the way every round works at a debate tournament is this. You're going to get 5 or 6 guaranteed preliminary rounds. Usually 6, sometimes 5, it just depends. And what that means is, no matter how many times you win or lose in the first 5, you're still going to debate 5 times or 6 times, right? Because that's sort of like our pool play. Just like in high school, we want to give everybody their money's worth and let everybody debate for this long trip they've been on, but we also need to figure out who's good enough to move on to the elimination rounds. And the way we do that is we debate 5 or 6 guaranteed times. Let's just say 6 from now on. And the people with the best records, sometimes the top, it can be anywhere from the top, it's very small tournaments, 4, right? More likely it's going to be 8 or 16, but there are some tournaments that we've gone to where it was top 32 or even 64, right? So it can get very big at some tournaments, yes.
Do they power match?
It depends. The tournaments in college have discretion. They'll usually try to tell you. Most of the time when I've asked, what they do is they power match on a 1-round lag. Now, some of you are looking at me like, oh my gosh, you're speaking Greek. What does that mean? Power matching means basically after they've done a couple of rounds, they're going to try to pair people with similar records against them to kind of break up the curve, right?
But they also power protect.
They might power protect in some rounds. The power protecting,
like at nationals.
Right. So there will be times when they feel like they pretty well just figured out who is at the top and the bottom, and they may go the other way. And they do that sometimes. Yes, at IPDA they have done that. Power matching would be, we'll take all our 0 and 2s, all our 1 and 1s, and all our 2 and 0s, right? And we'll match them against each other, and that way, the next week, that way we'll prevent and avoid having a a powerful debater hit a bunch of people whose collective record is like 1 in 15 for the whole tournament, or something. It'd be more than that, but you get the idea. It gives everybody a fair sampling of the pool. And 1 round lag just means that they do it based on your record from 1 round before. That way they don't have to like wait, right? That means they don't have to wait for the last round to be tabbed to put the next one out, okay? That's a good question. So you don't really need to worry about that in the tournament. So like you don't need, here's the one big point of advice. Don't worry about whether they're power protecting. Don't look at your opponent and say, oh my gosh, they're not very good and maybe they're power matching, that must mean I'm 0-2. Just blank your mind out on that. It doesn't matter. You can't change it, and you're probably wrong. Every time kids come to me in high school and say, oh crap, are they power matching Mr. Harvey because I'm going up against somebody good, and they're usually like, they're just as likely that they're 0-2 as that they're 2-0. So don't worry about it. Other thing, don't worry about how the last round went. It does not matter. It genuinely does not matter how the last round went. You've got to have a short memory in debate. It completely starts over. You know, it's like baseball. You get a new count every new batter that comes up. Forget how the last round went. Another reason, though, even more than in high school, why you need to have a short memory is because even if you have lost your first 5 rounds, you can still help us win sweepstakes in college because we get points for every win. Unlike in high school where you only get points for advancing, in college we get points for every win. And in fact, that's how we won LSU. We had so many points in prelims for all the wins that we had that we were able to beat some powerhouse schools with tons of IEs because we won so many rounds in prelims. And even some of our people who went 2 and 4 scored us 6 points because they won 2 rounds, right? So you can still help us. Do not ever give up. If you're in round 6 and you're 0-5 and you're against the weakest person in the tournament, for God's sake, beat that person, right? Because we need 3 points, right? You owe us 3 points at that point, right? I'm kidding, it's a joke. But you get the idea, right?
Or if you're in your last speech, don't just give up if you feel like you've lost the round. Keep
fighting to the end. Absolutely. Yes, never give up, never give up. So, but the way the round is going to work is it's going to start with a topic strike. You're going to be given 5 topics, and you and your opponent are going to go back and forth striking those topics, starting with the neg, striking a topic, then the app, and the neg, then the app. We're going to talk about striking later. Is everybody generally familiar with what topic striking is? We're all good on that? Okay, so that's going to, we're just going to go neg, app. We're going to strike the topics. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I mean, are y'all really good with that? Like, I see y'all nodding, but are y'all really good with?
I'm not going to be disappointed when we go to a tournament when I have somebody come back and like you're the neg and the top, well, you're the neg and the topic is racism is bad, right? I'm not gonna see that, am I?
Okay, I have a question. So is it the app that strikes first or the neg that strikes first?
Neg strikes first. Neg app, because we want to give the app the final choice because the app has the burden to affirm, right? We'll talk about some tips on those. The times. You need to tattoo these on your forearm, okay? Chad tattooed the wrong thing on his. I think he did the 10 Commandments. This is more important than that. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, the point is, the times. Learn it. It's basically a phone number. 5262353. You can sing it like 5262353. Yes, exactly. There you go.
That's why I didn't tattoo it.
Exactly. It's easy to remember. It's a song. Right, exactly. Thank you. We'll do the whole song later. I appreciate that. So, but anyway, it's like one of those things where we're all singing, we stop, and you're like still saying, okay. All right, it's that thing, right? Okay, but anyway, 5 minutes for the app, followed by a 2-minute cross-examination by the neg. Then 6 minutes for the neg, followed by a 2-minute cross-examination by the app. So those first 2 speeches are both followed by a 2-minute cross-examination period. So 5-2, 6-2, and then we're going to go app is going to get 3 minutes, neg is going to get 5 minutes, and app is going to get 3 minutes. The app speeches are shorter because the app goes first and last. The neg gets bigger, fewer speeches. And the reason for that is the app, again, has the burden of affirming, right? So we feel in this form of debate, not in all forms of debate, but in this form, that the app should go first and last because they have a burden of proof, right? But the neg has the advantage of having bigger blocks of time. I'm a neg guy.
But the times are equal.
Yes, they end up being the same. It's just the neg has more of them condensed together, but when you add them up, as you can see, I mean, if you can do basic math, you can see that they are the same. So there you go. You will prep with us together in a central prep area. We all prep together. This is the great fun difference from high school. In high school, you're very much flying solo at a debate tournament. Except for maybe sharing flows for people you've hit, there's not a lot your teammates can do for you in a high school tournament because all the debate is prep is done. We don't prep at the tournament. It's even different than extemp in high school because in extemp, if you've ever done that, it's extemporaneous speaking. You can't help each other. You can't talk to each other. Here, helping and talking is encouraged. I am encouraged to help you. Some people have asked, Brett, why don't you enter pro? And my answer to that is, number one, it's just whack for coaches to enter pro. You shouldn't do that. I don't know why people do that. But number two is because I think I add more value to the team by actually coaching people in prep than I would by scoring a few points in pro, which I can't even do in most tournaments. So, whatever. The point is,
whatever.
What?
Whatever.
What?
You couldn't score points in prep. Whatever.
Well, anyway, okay, yeah, so anyway, the point is we all prep together in a big area. Some tournaments will have one huge room, like at regionals at USM. Some will divide, like at nationals, will divide people up, or MC will divide people up, and like several people will share a prep room. Some tournaments like USM, the other USM tournament we went to, will just say, go, you're on your own, find your own place, and we'll go and like sort of colonize like a conference room or something where we sleep on the tables and eat, sandwiches and ring dings and things like that. And it's a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun because it's this mutual effort. And, your teammates will be helping you and they'll be giving you ideas. And you will be helping them. The other great thing is, unlike high school, we can use the internet all we want. I mean, not in the round, but in prep, we can use the internet all we want. We can Google to our heart's content. So unlike high school, it's great. And it is the most fun part of debate at any level, in my view, is a group prep room. I like it a lot. So we will be there to help you.
Wait, I have a question, but aren't multiple people going to have different topics all at the same time
Yes,
in the prep room?
that's the beautiful chaos of it.
That's on,
Yes, the wonderful, exciting chaos of it, which is I'm going to have to hop from person to person, and like somebody like, William may have had this topic last year, and so he'll have to come over and go, okay, like really fast, and like tell you because he's got to go. Yes.
Well, and at the same time, like there are times where you find where like 2 or 3 people on the same team have the same side of an argument, so we all just team up. It's like, okay,
yeah, a lot of the time
who got this resolution, who's on negative,
frequently,
who's on affirmative.
Yeah.
Let's go over here, let them go over here,
yes.
And Brett will bounce back and forth.
Yes, frequently. Other tournaments sometimes flight them, like they'll have varsity and novice in one flight and junior varsity and pro in the other, which means that the people who are in the second flight can help the people who are in the first flight because they don't have anything else to do. So there's a lot of different ways it works, but it's always fun. It's super fun. Remember, you have to arrive in your competition room by the end of the 30-minute period, which means your 30 minutes prep includes the walk time. So before we get started, it's probably a good idea for us to collectively kind of scout the buildings that rounds are going to be in to know where they are. They'll usually be pretty contiguous, but not always, right? So you need to build that time in. That means that, normally your prep time is really more like 25 minutes. At a far-flung tournament, it might be more like 20. But you need to be conscious of that because they really do expect you to be in the room, and they will really call a forfeit after about 10 minutes. So you've got to be there, right? You've got to be there. And the only written material you can take with you into the actual debate room is whatever you've written on your legal pad. So as much fun as we had on the internet, you cannot take your iPad in there and research new rebuttal material during the speech. You can't do your phone. You can bring your phone with you and put it on, if you ask the judge, you can bring your phone with you and put it on airplane mode and ask the judge if they're okay if you use it as a timer for yourself. Most judges will be, some may not. I would recommend though, and we'll talk about this in a minute, getting yourself just a cheap little plastic timer at Walmart and just use the app and carry it with you. And then you can just put your phone in your pocket. I mean, don't leave your phone sitting around, but you can put it in your pocket and just not get it out and around at all. Right?
There are some judges that will count you off if you use your phone as a timer.
And and also, the little plastic timer is never going to go to a black screen and you have to keep hitting it, right? So the little plastic timer is just your friend. So get yourself one of those. Invest, $4 or whatever it costs. Okay, so some more basics. Here's what you will need. You will need something to search online with. It can be a laptop, it can be a tablet, it can be your phone in a pinch if things are going bad. We've had some places, sometimes we've shown up and the Wi-Fi has gone crazy on us, right? And so that means our laptops are useless. So immediately we're searching on these. It just happens sometimes. So probably going to want to have your phone with you just as an emergency backup, right? But I will tell you, for me, some people like searching on their phones. For me, it's a little hard to get in there and do it fast enough because speed is important. So I actually, whatever you're most comfortable with, if you have a laptop or a tablet, I would recommend that you bring that, right? The prep room is generally pretty safe. I've never heard of anything getting stolen from one, but if you would like, you are more than free to, close the laptop, put it in the bag, turn it off, and take it with you, as long as you don't take it out during the round. But by and large, I've never heard of anything getting stolen in one of these tournaments, but then again, you never know. So just be aware. But something to search on. I forgot to put on here a timer, so don't forget a timer. Several legal pads. Remember, your legal pad is the only thing you can take with you. I didn't bring a very good one. This one's like already used up. But, get yourself a little pack of these. We'll probably bring a pack with us, just in case you don't have any. But you need, just kind of like at public schools now, because they're underfunded, you're expected to contribute to the pool of class supplies. So if everybody could please just get a pack of legal pads, or at least a few, that would be awesome. If you're really cool, you might want to get the legal length ones, the ones that are 14 inches instead of 11. That will help you flowing, although you don't really need it in IPDA debate. It's not like policy where you need all the space you can get. But either one, whatever you like. The short ones are fine. The longer ones are good too. Pens of at least 2 colors. Now, not everybody does this. When we talk about flowing in a minute, or one pen that has multiple colors in it, those are really good. But when we talk later about how to follow people's arguments, one neat trick, the one weird trick, right? But the one neat trick, right, for being good at keeping track of arguments is to write down your arguments in one color and your opponents in another. It really makes it easy, like one in black, one in red, one in blue, one in green, whatever. It makes it really easy to keep track of it. You don't have to do that. It's not required, but you may want to use it for something else. You may want to use red to just circle something really important, right, in the round, or underline a piece of evidence that's really important. But I do recommend having a couple of colors. Yes, sir?
I've seen a lot of people go around with like sticky notes and that kind of thing too. What do you think of that?
Well, sticky notes, some people do that on flowing, right? So some people will take, the legal pad in there and take a sticky note, like, and just write their response and stick it down, and the idea being that it's movable. You can do things with it. You can move it sideways. You can do whatever you want. I'm okay with that. I think, frankly, if you're comfortable with it, it's whatever works for you. For my money, it's a little too much sugar for a nickel, but whatever,
I think a lot of the sticky note business is to deal with group prep. When people go into out rounds and their team preps them out, and you say, hey, you look up this, you look up this, you look up this, and they all write it on sticky notes and then stick it to
the problem. And that's a good idea, but the problem with that is if somebody just stuck something onto your flow and you're standing there in the middle of the round trying to figure out what it means, they better know you pretty well, and they better be a pretty good writer for you to be able to decipher that. So I think there's a lot of risk to that. My preference is, and I think our results have borne this out, when we get into out rounds and we only have like 3 debaters left, I would rather we all kind of sit down with those debaters and discuss the arguments and decide what we're going to put on the flow. You can do it that way. Again, I think it's just trying to get a little too cute, because if you're standing up there and you see the sticky note, you're like, what the hell does this mean, right? It's difficult, right? It can be.
Hard.
Yeah, so. And then dress clothes, like what should you be wearing in this tournament? It's not quite as rigorous as high school. In high school, we generally expect everybody to wear suits, right? We're going to expect everybody to wear a suit. If you have a suit, great, wear a suit. That's not a bad idea at all. Feel free to wear a suit, but you don't have to. You can absolutely, I wouldn't be too underdressed for an IPDA tournament. I could go in there like this, and I don't think anybody would freak out. It'd probably be better if I had a tie, right? It'd be even better if I slapped on this jacket and a tie, right? But this is not like a formal outfit. I probably need to fix my shoe sole there, as you can see. But anyway, the point is, I wouldn't be out of place dressed like this with this jacket on. I'd be fine. If you have a suit, even better. Some judges will be impressed by that. But, a nice pair of pressed slacks, a nice shirt, a skirt, something like for a job interview, but maybe not like a job interview. It doesn't have to be like a job interview with a white shoe DC law firm. It'd be more like a job interview, here on campus or something. I mean, look presentable, look nice. Suits are great, but khakis, a nice shirt and a tie are perfectly acceptable. That works either way. Where they're not super hung up about clothes. Just don't be the ones who come in wearing we're not the team that wears like a Mississippi State polo shirt into rounds. We don't do that. So don't do that. If you have concerns or questions about clothes, come talk to me or Cheryl before we go. If you just don't know what you need to be wearing, if you're not sure, if you have something but you're not sure it's okay, let us know. But we do want to represent it. And by the way, it should be understated, right? So, you know, it's okay if maybe you have a tie that has a little flair, like a Tabasco tie, that's fine. But what we don't want, what?
Hashtag Josh.
Hashtag Josh, right? But what we don't want is like somebody coming in with like a big wide pinstripe like Al Capone looking suit that's like, you know, lime green with like pinstripe. We don't want anything too loud or too big or anything like that. You know, we don't, anything along those lines.
But
So,
wearing Mississippi State paraphernalia is okay.
oh yeah, maroon is obviously encouraged. Like I will wear a maroon checked tie, right? That's my maroon. So maroon flare is good. We do encourage a little pop of maroon if you can. A pocket square, a tie, you know, a maroon shirt would be okay, right? You know, those kinds of things. So a pop of maroon would be just fine and dandy. So let's get started on the particulars of the round strikes. So every round begins by striking topics. You'll get called down to the front of the room. You'll get called to some meeting area. You know, they will call you and you'll go and you'll find your opponent. You two will find each other. Or they'll call both of you and you'll come up and you'll be handed a piece of paper, right? And on that piece of paper will be 5 topics. Now, it will go neg af until one topic's left. Take your time. Good striking can mean a free win and bad striking can mean a free loss. There is no analog to this in high school. There's no analog to this in any other kind of debate that doesn't do limited prep. You know, Parley does, but most others don't. So if you do a bad job striking and you end up as the neg on resolved racism is bad, do not come to me and ask me to help you with that. I mean, I will try. Maybe we can argue that, you know, racism is terrible, right? You know, there's something not merely bad. Bad is not enough. That's exactly what we do. We can argue anything. We really can. But you have no one but yourself to blame if you do that. You know, if you come back the AF on some policy that you've never heard of, right? Unless the other 4 were even worse, right? You've no one to blame but yourself. Yes.
So they've already determined neg and af.
Yes, that's determined. Yes, that is determined before you ever go.
Unless you're in outrounds and you've already hit the person, and then it's a coin toss.
But in that case, you still have to toss the coin before you do the strikes. Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Okay. So, take your time. Your time is running at that point. So now you can't stand up there for 10 minutes, right? But you don't have to get done in 30 seconds. You can stand there and think for a minute or two, and if it slightly annoys your opponent, they will get over it. I promise you they will. There is no rule on how long it takes, but it would be bad for them to go like 5 minutes. But if you need an extra 30 seconds to get this done, take it. Slow down. Don't be bullied. Don't be pressured into doing a super, super fast strike. You can take a minute to think, okay? Breathe, calm down, don't be pressured, okay? So here are some tips, and we actually have a little article I've written on this. It's going to go into our Bible of IPDA that I'm working on with y'all, with others. But here are a few tips. If you're the AF, strike superlatives. Get rid of any resolution that requires you to say that something is the best or the most or the greatest. Because any resolution that says a superlative means that the neg's ground in that debate is everything else in the universe, right? So if they say Green Lantern is the greatest superhero, right, then that means all neg has to do is line up 9 other superheroes, or however many they want, and say, Judge, if you believe any one of these 9 is better than Green Lantern, I win. So stay away from superlatives if you are the AF. Best, most, greatest. Never touch those as the AF. Strike them. Strike extremely specific policy proposals, especially if you're not clear about what they are. Now, if you are clear on what they are and you really know about them, for example, if you really know about a carbon tax, and maybe you debated a carbon tax in high school, that was a topic, right? And you really know it, okay, go ahead. But if you don't know what the law of the sea treaty is, right, then don't run with it, because it's going to take time to learn the particulars of that policy, and the neg is going to have a similar set of advantages. They're going to be able to run alternatives to it. They're going to be able to critique very specific little parts of it, and you're going to have to hold that fortress while they attack from multiple angles. So, you know, as the AF, you want to have a little leeway, right? If you're locked into something, that means they know exactly what you're going to be defending. You know nothing about how they're going to attack it. So unless you're a real expert, you might want to stay away from super, super specific policy proposals. But on the other end of the spectrum, I would say is also stay away from impossibly vague things. Right? Sometimes we see impossibly vague resolutions and we think, oh, this is going to be awesome. I can make whatever I want out of it. So resolve, this house would trip the light fantastic. Okay, well, I mean, that sounds good. Resolve that bears are fuzzy and we love them. I mean, just whatever. I mean, sometimes tournaments do these crazy things. Like, it seems like they're sort of, like drug theme rounds, I mean, they're like as in they wrote the topics while they were on drugs, right? They do crazy resolutions sometimes. You might want to be careful about that, and here's why. Number one, of that 30 minutes you have to prep, you're probably going to spend 10 minutes trying to figure out what to do with this thing. You're going to burn a huge amount of time like trying to come up with a perfect interpretation of it, right? Number two, you're probably going to feel compelled to go disclose your interpretation of the topic to the opponent, right? Because it is so hard to predict, right? And, we'll talk about disclosure later, but that disclosure is going to eat at least 3 or 4 more minutes. And by the time you're getting ready to go into the round, you're prepping on like 8 or 10 minutes, real actual prep time trying to find evidence on this thing. So be very careful with the super vague stuff. And of course, anything that's totally unfamiliar to you. If something you just don't know anything about, try not to bring that back to us if you can avoid it, which is why being well read is important. If you're the neg, you just flip those, right? Try to keep the superlatives. Try to keep topics. Don't strike topics with really high burdens. So, for example, LeBron is better than Jordan. We'd love to have that, right? Because, I mean, even if it's a close question, Jordan is the highest standard you can have in basketball. So, if as the neg, you would be able to concede all kinds of good things about LeBron without losing the round. Things with high burdens, even if they're not superlative. Stay away from the incredibly vague as well, because the incredibly vague means your opponent can ambush you and do all kinds of crazy stuff. But these are some tips for striking. And here's an important one that nobody thinks of, but I didn't think of it until this year, but it's important. Strike the second worst topic first. Decide what topics you really don't want in the round. Decide the 2 topics that you don't want to have in the round, and strike the second worst topic first. And here's why. Because on your topic list, there is going to be a topic that is atrocious. And it might just be atrocious for you, but it might be atrocious for both sides. It might be just a really hard topic, a really vague topic, a really bizarre topic. If you strike it first, then you're throwing away whatever small percentage chance there was that your opponent would just swoop in and do the work for you. Now it's got to get off there. So on your second one, if they don't, you're going to need to strike it, right? But on the first one, strike the second worst topic, and then see if they will do some of your work for you by striking the worst topic. Then that'll give you another free strike to get off of it. So pick your 2 topics to strike the second worst, and then strike the worst. Just a little free strategy to maybe get you a slightly better topic every once in a while. Yes?
Overrated and underrated. Those, I don't feel like those are good ones.
Yeah, overrated or underrated those actually happen a lot. You see those. And that is going to require you as the AF to establish how they are rated, right? In other words, you're going to have to do 2 things. Number one, you're going to have the burden of establishing how they're rated, right? And then you're going to have to establish that however they're rated, that they are in fact better or worse than that. So overrated and underrated happen a lot, but that's a good point more broadly is think about how many different points the resolution is going to require you to establish. Like, how many different things am I going to have to prove here? And overrated and underrated is an excellent example. You're going to have to prove how it's rated, and if the neg beats you on that, then you lose. And then you're going to have to prove that it's either over or under what that suggests. That's a great, thank you, excellent, very good, well done. Prep time. Some thoughts about how we do prep time. Your case is a battle plan, not a book report, okay? The case is not there to just write some general stuff to show you know about the topic. Your case is a map, it's a battle plan, it's a playbook for a football team to get you to what? What does winning in debate mean?
Victory.
Getting them to write name in the ballot.
Writing your name and your code in the box that says the winner. Your case is a battle plan to get you there. We're not going to put a bunch of garbage in there where we just sort of generally talk about the topic. Now, don't get me wrong, you have enough time. Like, if you want to give some background as the AF just to be a good speaker and you still have plenty of time to tell your case, that's fine. But that's not going to win the round for you, right? That's not going to win. It might get you an extra speaker point or 2, which we have speaker awards. You can win awards just for being well-spoken, even if you don't advance. So feel free. Feel free to have a good introduction. I'll talk about that in a minute. If you want to do a little talking and give a little background and be a little more loquacious and eloquent, that's fine, but that cannot come at the expense of the actual argument. And the argument is a roadmap to a logical conclusion. Okay, that's what we're writing, and it is more demanding than many of the things that you will have written in high school or even in college, right? It's more challenging. It is a logical roadmap. It is a battle plan, not a book report. I don't want you putting stuff in there just because there was an article about it. It seems kind of important. How does it win the round for you, right? Or how does it weaken your opponent? How does it preempt or defend against one of their arguments? You must think strategically about what this point is doing in the speech. We don't just get up there and sort of talk about the topic generally. I'll explain what that means a little more as we go. You should understand what your routes to victory will be. Ideally, there should be more than one. You need to have in your head clear what you have to win in order to win the debate, right? So you need to understand, for example, if you go into a round and the resolution is, let's say you're the negative, right? And the resolution says, you know, resolved, we should invest. Let's do Amtrak. You guys did Amtrak. Resolved, we should invest more in Amtrak, right? And your 3 points are, you know, number one, we should take the same amount of money and invest it in some other government program. Number two, we should take the same amount of money and lower taxes. And then number three, even if you don't believe that, Amtrak is bad because it only benefits one region of the country, and therefore we should let the states do it, which is like a state's counterplan. If you've done that case, then what should be clear to you in your mind and what you should make clear to your judge is that there are 3 separate routes that you can go as the negative to win. And you should be explaining that to the judge. You should be saying, Judge, I have 3 contentions. The first 2 are other programs that we should be spending the money from Amtrak on because they're better. If you believe either one of those contentions, contention 1 or contention 2, that by itself is enough for you to vote negative. However, I also have a third point, which is that we shouldn't be doing Amtrak at the federal level at all because it only benefits a few states. States should be doing it. If you agree with that point, but not the other 2, that's a third independent reason to vote for the negative. In other words, you're not just throwing 3 contentions out there as a hash and saying, I've got 3 good points and their points are bad. That's going to happen in some debates. I'm going to be honest with you. There will be debates where it kind of becomes a hash. But you need to have a logical understanding of what your structure is. So the best one would be, and we had this in the practice debate the other night, I am the negative, I have 3 different points, right? They are 3 different alternatives to whatever is proposed. Any one of them by itself is a sufficient reason for you to vote against the resolution. Having that is the level of understanding of your case that you need to have. Not, I've got 3, it's not like, let's count up contentions. I have 3 contentions standing and he only has 2. Well, that's great, and that might win you some rounds, but it's a lot better if you can say, in order for him to win, he has to prove all 3 of his contentions true. I've refuted all 3. For me to win, I only have to win any of my 3. I win all 3. You can take your pick of 3 different reasons to vote nay, right? You're not going to say it exactly like that. You're going to be a little bit more loquacious with it, right? But that is the basic way we want to understand the structure of our battle plan. You will, look, there's no way to learn that but to do it. You will see it as you go into rounds and you actually debate, but you will understand it better as you do it. You should hit pause about 10 minutes left in your prep time, and ask yourself, is there any glaring weakness that you haven't addressed? If you have somebody helping you, like if they're not prepping, you should ask them, is there anything I'm forgetting? Is there anything I'm missing? Is there any glaring hole? You might be able to patch it up with a solid definition or a solid observation about the structure of the round. Is there some big hole? Is there some big problem or some big defect in your case that you are missing? In other words, you need to devote at least a couple of minutes in that prep time to thinking about what is the most likely argument against you going to be, right? What is the big glaring hole they're going to go for, and see if there is a way for you to preempt it. Very often there will be ways to preempt it, and I am more than happy to help, and the varsity people are going to be more than happy to help. It might be as simple as defining a term in a certain way as to sort of cancel out whatever that argument is. That's very often a possibility. But if you don't think about that, you can walk into a round and have a great case that has one hole in it and it sinks. Okay? Think about the weaknesses in your case before you head out. And at about 5 minutes left, and that's not 5 minutes left in the 30 minutes, that's 5 minutes before you leave, you really should be basically done outlining the case on the legal pad, right? You should be basically done with that, and you should take a minute to sort of run through it in your head. You don't have to stand up and go stand in the corner and practice it like if you did an extemp in high school, although you can do that. But you do need to sort of just take a minute, look at the gestalt of it, which just means the whole of it. Like, look at the whole thing, take a second to take it in, think about how you're going to say it as you go through it, because those speaker points matter, right? Take a minute to breathe, look at that thing. How am I going to say this? Do I have all my evidence clearly written down? Do I have all my stats clearly written down? Remember, this thing you're reading from is going to be an outline. The outline is going to have the name of your contentions on it. It's going to have the evidence underneath it. If you have statistics, you're going to be writing out the statistics. Make sure you can understand what they say, right? Make sure that if you have a statistic about we're going to save this many deaths from cancer and it's from Time Magazine in 2016, that you can make out that, okay, according to Time Magazine in 2016, we're going to save X number of deaths from cancer if we do so-and-so, right? Make sure you can read it and you know what it says, right? Don't run off to the room and be like, oh crap, what did I write down here, right? Okay. The case. Oh, did I copy that? Okay, sorry. I guess it was on that class. Okay, there we go. The case. So your case will manifest itself as an outline that appears on one sheet of a legal pad. So you're going to be outlining it, and you want it to be pretty clear, right? If you have multiple sub-arguments under an argument, you're going to want to put, a little A or a B or a bullet point or whatever helps you keep it clear, right? But if there are logical steps in the argument, for example, if you need to prove that if you have a quote that says X is a big problem, and then next you have a stat that says whatever will solve the problem, that needs to be clear. You need to have a little bullet point that says, according to Stephen Hawking or just, whoever, this is a big problem, right? And a little bit from the quote. And then next, according to, the Brookings Institution in 2017, this solves the problem. Those need to be clear on your outline, right? It's going to be an outline that you're reading from, not a script, not a written case, unlike high school debate. So that's why you need to go over it. It should take between 4 and 5 minutes to deliver. If you have an extra argument that you can throw in, this is the AF, by the way. When we're talking about the AF, your AF should take between 4 and 5 minutes to deliver. Don't go in there and give a 2-minute speech. Is it possible to say everything you need to say in the AF in 2 minutes? It is, but it doesn't seem professional. So you need to slow down and take your time and say your thank yous and maybe have a little bit of an intro. You can totally take your time on the affirmative constructive speech. 5 minutes is going to be more than you need. And if you end up speaking for 4 minutes and being done, that's fine. I mean, there's a lot of good asks that are done in that amount of time. So it's not exactly like high school in the sense that you're going to be running right up to the last second and then running over it, right? But don't speak for 2 minutes. Take a little time to digress and talk. Give a little bit of an intro. On the negative, we'll talk about that in a minute. On the negative, your case should not be more than 4 minutes because you're going to have 6, but you're going to need all that time because you're going to have to do your own case and address your opponent's case when you are the negative in that one speech. So your negative should really be going about 3:30 to 4 minutes. So this is why you need a timer in the round, because especially when you're the negative, you've got that 6-minute speech, but you need to have a timer in front of you so that you know, okay, I've gone 4 minutes, I've only got 2 minutes left, it's time for me to move on and start talking about my opponent's case, right? So that's why you have to have that there, okay? But the AF's between 4 and 5 minutes. The parts of the case are the intro, the statement of the resolution, the definitions, the weighing mechanism, contentions, subpoints, and the conclusion. And we'll talk about all those in just a second. So the intro. I am actually a fan of having a little bit of an intro in debate, and I'll tell you why. A lot of debaters don't do this, but remember, so many of your judges are what we call lay judges. By lay, I mean like a lay person, a person who's not trained in debate. And they may very well think of what we are doing as more of a speaking contest and less of a logic contest, right? And if you hedge your bets and give them a little bit of what they want, then you might get an easy win out of that. So a lot of people just get up and go, okay, well, I want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks to you, Judge. Thanks to my opponent. Let's get right into it. The resolution is blah, 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 and I affirm, right? That's okay. And if you're being judged by me, that's fine, right? If you know the person. But if you're being judged by someone who's like, somebody's grandpa who's never seen this before, or some college student, and you're debating, for example, civil disobedience, we have some girls who are winning every tournament in civil disobedience right now, and one of the things they do differently than other people is they get up and give an intro. And they say, as Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail, when we disobey unjust laws in order to change them, we do not violate the spirit of the law, but rather we show the highest respect to it by holding it to the standard it has set for itself. And because I agree with Dr. King, I affirm the resolution, civil disobedience. You see what I'm saying? They give a little introduction. I am a fan. Okay? I am a fan of having a little bit of an opportunity to give a little introduction, especially in this event. I can't force you to do it, but it gives you a chance to show off a little bit of that style, a little bit of that flair. It can be a quote, it can be a personal anecdote, it can be a joke, it It can be, you know, whatever you got, whatever you can find. It can be a statistic that catches the attention and then you can come back and say it later as part of the contention or something like that. I am a fan, but, you know, don't make it go too long. Keep it relatively short. Also, I guess I should say for those of you who are new, there is the phenomenon of the thank you. Thank yous are important in IPDA debate. We do them more than any other type. If you did LD or policy or something in high school, you're not going to be used to getting up and saying thank you in every speech. Some schools do it really, really over the top. They go, well, I want to thank you, Judge. Judge, if you weren't the judge, we would not be here today. We wouldn't be debating today, Judge, because you are the best judge. Who's a good judge? It's you, Judge. You're a good judge. Who's a good judge? Yes, you are. I want to thank my opponent, my handsome, debonair, exciting, fun, lovely, talented opponent, for being such a wonderful person. I've seen you at other tournaments. We know each other. I'm going to pretend we're friends because we know each other. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody at this tournament. I mean, it's too much.
That works with Nala's judging, though, right?
Nala loves it. Who's a good judge? Who's a good judge? Anyway, the way I would suggest doing your thank yous is this. On the first speech, say something like this. Well, Judge, I want to thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time. I want to thank my opponent for what I'm sure is going to be a great round. Well, let's get started. And then you can do your intro, right? That's more than enough. Judges don't expect a ridiculous thing. In the subsequent speeches after that, you're probably going to want to do a real quick thank you, like, Judge, thank you again to my judge. Thanks to my opponent for what's been a great round so far.
Let's get back into it.
Let's get back into it. That's more than enough, okay? That's plenty. So always say you thank Judge. I want to thank you again for adjudicating today. Thank my opponent for a great round so far. Let's jump right back into it. That's plenty, okay? That meets the requirements of etiquette in IPDA. It is expected, but it doesn't go over the top into being sort of cloying and syrupy and ridiculous, okay? So we do say our thank yous with every speech, but we don't go over length with them. We keep them restrained. Has everybody got that? Great. Remember that. Don't forget that. So, statement of the resolution. Sometimes this seems obvious, but we forget it. You need to actually say the resolution itself and never paraphrase it. When you get the resolution and you go prepare for it, you need to write it down word for word. Words matter in debate. Never paraphrase. Never paraphrase when you write it down on your pad. Never paraphrase when you speak it out loud. Because those words are the goal line, right? And you can't fudge the goal line in football. You can't say, oh, they got 1 yard away. Getting 1 yard away is worth 0 points, right? You cannot fudge that. And in debate, you can't either. For example, the structure, the tense of verbs can matter. The tense of a verb in a resolution could dictate whether you have the ability to debate about what is happening now versus what has happened in the past. For example, if the resolution says that plea bargaining in America today is harmful, and somebody comes in with a bunch of stats about plea bargaining in the 60s, right, the negative could very well say that those statistics are not topical because the resolution says plea bargaining is, especially if it said is today or something like that. You see what I'm saying? Those little words, even right down to the verb tense, can dictate sort of what is in bounds versus what is out of bounds. So we never paraphrase. And when we get up, we say, and so I affirm today's resolution resolved in a democracy, civil disobedience is justified. You see what I'm saying? We say it exactly right. We never paraphrase. Yes?
If we reference the resolution later on during the debate, should we say it's still word for word?
You don't necessarily have to say it word for word later on, depending on how you say it. Now, if you're making an argument about what is topical, that is to say what is relevant, you might be saying, my opponent's argument is relevant, let's look back at the resolution at what it says, and then yes, you would read it. If you're saying just, you know, if the topic is some lengthy statement about North Korea, and you're just saying, look, this resolution is about missiles in North Korea, you know, you don't have to say the whole thing then. But at the beginning of the speech, right, when you say, I affirm the resolution, right, you need to be exact. And if you ever come back and you're discussing what's in bounds versus what's out of bounds, what's relevant versus what's not relevant, you have to use the words exactly because those sort of define the boundaries of the playing field. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Well, and if the affirmative, like, affirms it, like, off-kilter, defines it off-kilter, you can be specific as far as being negative and say, this is what this says.
Exactly right. Exactly right, Chad. And this is a concept called topicality. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of depth tonight because this is boot camp, but you do need to know what topicality means. Topicality basically means if it doesn't fit within the resolution as worded, it's not relevant. So let me go back to this example. Let's say the resolution says plea bargaining is hurting the American criminal justice system, right? And you come in and you're the neg. And your opponent comes in and all their statistics are from the 1960s with plea bargaining, okay? Well, one thing you're going to stand up and say, okay, right off the bat, I want to point out that basically my opponent's entire case is going to be non-topical, and let me explain why. Look at the resolution. It says, resolve, plea bargaining is hurting America's justice system. Is a present tense verb. Unfortunately, all of my opponent's examples come from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. None of the sources they cite come from today. And that means that although their case is very well stated and I think very well said, they're not talking about what is going on. And that means they can't win today's debate using the evidence they've given you. So right off the bat, without saying anything else, you're going to have a clear-cut reason to vote negative today because the affirmative didn't meet their burden of talking about what is happening with plea bargaining today. You see what I'm saying? That's a very simple, straightforward, what we call a topicality argument. They are not talking about what is actually required under the resolution. You see what I'm saying? Great. Yes?
One thing just I think that we missed, when you go into the round and you have to write your stuff on the board.
Exactly.
And then you can also write the resolution. That's what I do at least, so then there's no question about
That's actually a great point. So when you go in, you're going to write your side, which is A for neg, right, and your name. And at tournaments where you have a code, like a school code, which doesn't always happen, we don't usually have them in college. In high school, you would put your school code. In college, we usually don't have a school code. You don't put your school. The judge is not supposed to know your school. They may, as it gets out pretty easily, but formally they're not supposed to. So, they'll probably figure it out from you're the ones wearing maroon, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is considered very bad form to go in and overtly reference your own school. So don't reference that you're from Mississippi State. But yes, William is exactly right. Feel free to write the resolution on the board. That will help the judge, especially if you think there's going to be a topicality issue, right? If you think there's going to be some fight over a definition or what a word means or what's inbounds or out of bounds, it will be very helpful for you to be able to point at the board and say, here's what the resolution is. Because remember, they're not going to have it on their ballot because you just got it 30 minutes ago, so there was no time to put it on their ballot, right? So that's a good idea, very good. You will write your name and your sign on the board, I forgot that, and feel free to write the resolution, good point. Definitions. It is important, especially if you are the affirmative, that you define the key terms in the resolution, okay? Define the key terms in the resolution. Now, in some cases, it's going to be super obvious, okay? So, for example, resolved, LeBron is better than Jordan. You'll just come in and say, okay, well, let's define a few key terms. I think they're pretty obvious. LeBron is going to mean LeBron James, the current basketball player with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Jordan is, of course, going to be Michael Jordan, the former basketball player with the Bulls and the Wizards. Better than, it's just going to mean which one is the better basketball player. So the weighing mechanism in today's round is going to be who was in their prime the better basketball player between the two. That's super simple, right? In other cases, though, you really might need to go into the definitions. So, for example, if I'm doing that resolution I talked about earlier, resolve, plea bargaining is hurting the criminal justice system, right? I might come in and say, well, plea bargaining is going to refer to the situation in which a criminal defendant accepts a lower sentence in exchange for pleading guilty. The criminal justice system is just the system of courts and jails in the United States. I also want to make one point, which is the word is a present tense verb, which means that we are debating what is going on right now, which means that things that went on years ago will not be relevant in this debate. You have to make a judgment call about what needs a definition. I will say this, though. Definitions matter. You are not going to know right now as you go to your first tournament how important definitions are, but we're going to help you with that. Like in your prep time, we will help you understand what definitions will be advantageous. And we will tell you, you need to define this way. And as you debate, you'll start to see why that's important, right? You just have to do it through experience. But we will help you with that during prep time. As the affirmative, you're going to want to err on the side of defining most of the terms, and here's why. In IPDA Debate, they're one of the very few rules that we have. We don't have a lot of rules beyond the times. But one rule we do have is that the affirmative has the right to define the terms of the resolution unless their definitions are abusive, which means there is a presumption in favor of the affirmative's definitions. which means you basically get a free opportunity to define the resolution somewhat in your favor, as long as you don't go so far as to make it a truism, right? As to make it non-debatable. So, for example, if we say LeBron is better than Jordan, and we're the AF, and we define LeBron as LeBron James, and we define Jordan as, you know, who's another Jordan that doesn't play basketball?
Michael B. Jordan.
Michael B. Jordan. He's better than Michael B. Jordan at playing basketball. Well, that would be an abusive definition. We're going to define Jordan as Michael B. Jordan, and the question is, which one is the better basketball player? Right? So that would be an abusive definition, right? That would be something where your opponent would say, this is clearly abusive, I have no ground to debate, I as the negative get to challenge the definition. But unless it's abusive, unless you don't give them effective ground to debate, or you define it in a way that's just false, right? If you say, resolve the SALT treaty was a treaty about the sale of salt, right? You know, that would be an abusive definition because it's not true. You get the presumption, right? So it is good for you as the AF to go ahead and define these terms, right? So, but you don't have to get a dictionary definition. Right? You can, you know, if you feel like maybe there's going to be a fight over it, it might be a good idea to pull a different dictionary definition. But normally you can just sort of say, you know, LeBron James means LeBron James, and you know, that sort of thing. It's usually pretty casual, yes.
So if the neg gets to object to whatever your definition is, who actually then decides whether or not that objection is
The
valid?
judge. Everything's up to the judge.
Okay.
Yeah, the judge is judge, jury, executioner, appeals court, Supreme Court. It's ultimately whatever they believe. If
But I
they,
mean, you have to respond to the neg and say, hey, I have the right to define the definition. I have provided a fair definition, and you have not shown why it's abusive, so...
yeah.
And then the judge decides.
And the judge will
Yeah,
decide.
the judge will ultimately decide. And look,
But
we
you
try...
have to respond.
Yeah, we try hard, if we can, to avoid debates over definitions. But every varsity debater in this room is going to tell you they happen sometimes. And you will have some debate at some point this year where you define it one way and your opponent tries something weaselly, and you have to learn how to argue about why their definition is unfair, persuade the judge that yours is fair, and then win the case based on your definition. Now, that sounds hard, and it is kind of hard at first, but you will learn to do it, right? You will go into a round where somebody will say, give you a definition that is sketchy, and you will have to be prepared to say right off the bat, I want to say, point out my opponent's definition is unfair, let me explain why. Because it's unfair, I'm going to offer an alternate definition, which is this, blah, blah, blah. And under this alternate definition, I'm going to explain why the negative wins the debate. And the AF is going to come back and you're going to debate about definitions. We try to avoid it. Most people think that's a bad way to debate. It's not ideal, but it will happen. I didn't mean to go quite that far down the road, but I got him and I got you, yes.
Yes. When would you raise that contention? Would you do it
In the first negative, in the negative constructive. You'd raise it as soon as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, so in generally speaking, you raise every argument the first speech you have an opportunity. So yes, if you're the neg and you think the AF's definitions are abusive or unfair or inaccurate, which I would say is a form of being abusive, then you raise them in the first negative constructive. Yes.
Could you bring it up during cross-ex, or should
You could, but why give them an opportunity? I'm not a big believer in giving people second chances in cross-ex. Like, if somebody has done something bad that could lose them the round, I very rarely ask them. And for example, if somebody drops an argument, I'm never going to ask them if they dropped it in cross-ex, because that just gives them one more chance to not drop it, right? I'm going to let them get through it safely and squarely into my speech and then point it out. Now, here's the thing. One exception to that. Maybe you believe this was a good faith mistake, right? Maybe you believe this person didn't really mean to be abusive with it and you want to clarify. That is legit. Like, if you want to say, okay, you defined it in this way, right? And you can say, and if it's just really ridiculous, right, and there's no way you could affirm it. For example, if the resolution is something, if the way they define it is crazy and it says that, something happened that historically never happened, you can say, well, let me make sure I understand. Your definition is blah, 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 blah. Is that right? And you can say, okay, so tell me, just since that actually never happened, or since that is literally mathematically impossible, what could the negative prove to win this debate? Like, you can actually ask that. If you think it's really abusive, you can say, okay, so just tell me, like, what could the negative say since that never happened, right? Or since that's mathematically impossible, or since that's a logical impossibility, or a linguistic impossibility, right? Or a self-contradiction, or whatever, right? What could the negative say to prove? What could the negative say to negate that? Give me one example of what I could say, right? And so you can even say, I promise, if you tell me one, I won't use it. I will stipulate that whatever you tell me, I won't use, but give me one example of how I can negate the resolution. And if they can't name one, then you can get them and say, they have given an abusive definition, let me give you a counter definition, and let's actually have a debate here, right? Yes?
I was just going to do say an example of like definitions. Is one time I had a round where it was about like cell phones shouldn't be allowed, or computers, what was it? Cell phones or computers shouldn't be allowed in the classroom.
Yeah.
And they were, I think it was cell phones, and they were like, that is also computers or something. They basically just tried to say like,
The cell phones and computers were the same thing.
Exactly.
And we prepped you and told you that they couldn't argue that because cell phones are one thing and computers are a different thing.
and so what I said to the judge was basically like, unless you call this thing in your pocket, and I held up my cell phone, I was like, unless you call this your computer, they're not the same thing.
Right. You gotta go?
I gotta go.
That's fine. So anyway, but definitions should give you an advantage, but they should never make the resolution a truism. You should never be abusive to the point where you try to define people out of the round. You should never do the Michael B. Jordan definition at a basketball debate, right? Never, you can define is better than to mean like better than in their prime, right? If you think that that would give you an advantage, because that's still debatable, right? That might give you a little bit of an advantage to say better than in their prime, because obviously, that might help you. Who knows?
Or you could even argue, Michael Jordan now versus LeBron now.
I don't think that would be a little bit abusive, but you get the point. You can never, but you can't be, make it a truism. So we got a lot to cover. So let's see if we can wade through it. The weighing mechanism. Okay. The weighing mechanism is going to be the standard you're asking the judge to use. This is the next part of every case. So in other words, you're going to tell the judge, here's the standard I would like you to apply in the round. You're going to say, after you do your definitions, you're going to say, so the weighing mechanism I'm going to suggest to you that the weighing mechanism you should use to decide this round ought to be blah, 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 right? And you're going to suggest a way they can do it. Now, I will tell you right now, yes.
Does the weighing mechanism have to link to your contentions?
It should, because if it doesn't, if you give a weighing mechanism and then you do 3 contentions that have nothing to do with it, you're probably going to lose, right?
Your contentions should uphold your weighing mechanism.
Right.
Okay.
So,
you could ask people like how their contentions link to their weighing mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But I will tell you right now.
What are the best weighing mechanisms?
Well, we got to kind of hurry here because I want to get through it, but I'd love to give you some of the best weighing mechanisms. But let me tell you the laziest. The laziest weighing mechanism is what many people do, which is to just go in and say the weighing mechanism is on balance. That is what half of all debate rounds have. Somebody just goes in and says the weighing mechanism is on balance. And my question as a debater would be, on balance of what? What are we balancing here, right? So, a lot of times on balance just means if we take the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, which one of these two sides is better, right? A lot of people will do that. I strongly suggest to you that you should be more specific. I believe that your weighing mechanism should be a topic-specific question, explanation of what question the judge should ask. And let me give you an example before I do the next one. Here's an example. Let's do the Michael Jordan versus LeBron thing again, okay? So I could get up and I could say the weighing mechanism is on balance, and I could just move on. Contention 1, blah, 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 right? But what would be a better way to do it would be, the weighing mechanism I would suggest that you use in today's debate is to ask which of these 2 basketball players was a better player in their prime. So in other words, and the way you should determine that is looking at a preponderance of the evidence. So if at the end of the round, the preponderance of the evidence shows that LeBron James was better at his best point in his career, then I should win the round. And if the evidence shows that Michael Jordan was better, then my opponent should win the round, right? I really believe in giving a clear explanation like that because it lets you chart a course in the judge's mind rather than letting the judge make up the course for themselves, right? It lets you give a clear direction, draw a clear line, and say, Judge, here's what I'm going to try to prove. If I show you that LeBron was better on his best day than Jordan on his best day, and most of the evidence proves that, then I should win. If not, my opponent should win. It's a clear line, and that means you can debate toward a very specific point rather than just leaving it up to the judge to make up in their head what, on balance means. I really believe in doing that. So, for example, the weighing mechanism should be the side that presents the stronger evidence. So if at the end of the round you find the evidence supports the U.S. federal government getting rid of its criminal prohibition on marijuana use, even if it keeps certain restrictions and regulations, then you should vote out. That's a good weighing mechanism for like a legalized marijuana resolution, right? A bad mechanism would be on balance. because you're just kind of throwing it up in the air. And by the way, these slides are going to be sent to you, so you don't have to like transcribe them. Makes you sound smart and keeps around focused on what you're arguing. Next, your contentions. These are the main points of your case. You're usually going to have 3 of them, maybe 2 when you're on the neg. These are the major reasons why the judge should vote for you. These are going to be the big tent poles in your case, like the 3 points in an essay, okay? You don't always have to have 3, you might have 4, you might have 2. Go ahead.
Can the neg object to the weighing mechanism too?
Yeah, absolutely. The neg can offer a counterweighing mechanism, but you have to explain why. And this gets into sort of debating about debate, like saying, look, my opponent gave a weighing mechanism, and you have to explain why it's bad. Does it make it impossible to have a debate? Does it mean that one side automatically wins? Does it make the debate less educational? Does it exclude relevant information? For example, if the resolution says Marvel is better than DC, and they come in with a definition that says we're only going to look at like TV series, right? Then you can
that's unfair.
Then you could come in and say, I'm going to object to that for 2 reasons. Number one, it's unfair because it excludes a huge portion of the ground that I have in the debate that I prepared for. But number 2, it's also less educational because it means that we will not be exploring about 90% of the things that these companies produce. So it will be, number 1, a less fair debate, and number 2, a less educational debate. So I'm going to offer a counter standard, which will be just look at everything that Marvel and DC produce and decide which one you think is better. So that's what I'm going to suggest to you as your standard. That's absolutely fair if you absolutely can do that. But your contentions will be the main points. Each should be supported by adequate evidence, and if necessary, you may have to divide it into subpoints, right? You may have to make little points underneath each point to kind of walk through. Evidence is important. You may say, how much evidence is enough? And it's just like the old Yiddish, folk, whatever it is, how big should a man's hat be? Big enough to cover his head. How much evidence do you need? Enough evidence to prove the point, right? You may find one really great piece of evidence that does all the work for you. If you do, I salute. God bless, right? Good for you. You may have to go do some work and pull 3 or 4 different statistics and cobble them together in your speech. I'm a big believer in what I call evidence dumpster diving, right? You're going to be looking, your instinct is going to be go out and look for that one study or quote or article that just does all the work for you. If you do, God bless, good for you. But guess what? Your opponent probably also found it and is probably preparing for it as well. If you are able to go and pull statistics together on your own, and I don't have time tonight to explain how to do that, but to pull them together and put them in context, you can come up with some neat little toys in the debate round that they won't see coming. I wish I had time to explain it. We'll talk more about it in the future. But you need as much evidence as you need, right? If you want to say that something a policy is necessary, you're probably going to need some evidence that the status quo is causing some harms, right? That right now, when we don't do this policy, people are dying, or we're losing money, or jobs are leaving the country. You're probably going to need some evidence that doing the policy would solve the problem, right? You're probably going to need some evidence that says another country did it and it fixed the problem, right? Or a state did it and it fixed the problem. Or an expert thinks it would fix the problem. I can't give you a rundown of every piece of evidence because there are a million different logical propositions out there. But you need evidence for each part, because if you don't have evidence and you just sort of go on your gut and say, here's what I think, and your opponent has evidence and they can explain why that matters, they're going to win, right? This is a skill that takes time to develop, and over time you will be better at finding that evidence and putting it in your case. Right now, just know we expect you to have it, right? We expect you to make a good faith stab at having good evidence, and we will try our best to help you find it. Your contentions should attack the resolution from different angles, okay? If all of your contentions say the same thing, then your opponent is going to be able to group them together and attack them all at once, right?
It's called a clump and dump.
If all of your contentions are one thing, they will clump them together and they will attack them all at once. If you say the same thing 3 different ways, then your opponent will be able to spend all their time. You see what I'm saying? If they say 3 different things, then they're going to have to burn a lot of their time attacking it from 3 different angles. Sports fans, anybody? The analogy I use is the spread offense. The spread offense spreads players from one side of the field to the other side of the field, right? And makes the defense defend all 53 yards across the football field. A good debate case should do the same thing. It should come at the problem from different angles and make the opponent defend all of those angles, right? Rather than just saying one specific thing. Now, is that possible in every resolution? Maybe not, but it's a good principle to keep in mind. The basic structure of arguments and contentions, and I want you to sort of tattoo this on your arm too. We probably got about another 15 minutes here. I know you guys are we're running a little bit long, but I do think it's worth covering this, so we won't keep you too much longer. The basic structure of the arguments and contentions is claim, warrant, impact. Claim, warrant, impact. Claim, warrant, impact. Claim, warrant, impact. This is the basic structure of an argument in debate, and you need to know what the three parts are. They're like the engine, the middle car, and the caboose of a train, right? You have to have all three, or you don't have a train. The claim is simply an assertion without evidence. By itself, a claim is not an argument. An assertion is, for example, let's go back to our Jordan versus LeBron. An assertion would be, Jordan was the greatest defender ever. That by itself is merely an assertion, right? It is a claim. Many novice debaters only debate the claim. On their flow, when they write down notes about the round, all they write down is the claim. They don't try to write down the evidence or the impact. People, a lot of times when you're a young debater, you'll just get up and be like, he said Jordan was the better defender, that's just wrong, and let me explain why, without listening what the evidence was. So what would the evidence be? Warrant, by the way, is just another word for evidence. Don't say warrant in the round, that's a technical, nerdy debate term. But warrant means evidence. So what's your proof? Well, our proof is according to the sportsalmanac.com, Michael Jordan won NBA Defensive Player of the Year 5 times. And LeBron has never won NBA Defensive Player of the Year. Okay? Well, that would be a piece of evidence, right? I mean, it would absolutely be legitimate evidence, okay? What is the impact? Here's the thing almost everybody forgets. You have to explain how the claim and the evidence tie back to the resolution to make you win, right? So if you just stopped and said, Jordan won a bunch of Defensive Players of the Year, LeBron never won any, well, on that one it'd be pretty easy to kind of intuitively understand why it matters. But it's still important for you to tie it back and say, look, you cannot be the best player in the game unless you have a well-rounded game. Too often in today's NBA, people focus exclusively on offense rather than defense, but basketball is a sport that requires both. And you should give equal weight to offense and defense. So even if at the end of the debate you think that LeBron is slightly ahead on offense, a little bit better on offense, or the same on offense, at the end of the day, Jordan was vastly better on defense. He's one of the best defensive players ever. And that means that in this debate, the question is not close. So let me do the whole argument for you. Contention 1, Jordan is the greatest defender of all time. According to basketballalmanac.com, Jordan won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. LeBron has won 0. The reason this matters is because even if the two of them are close in terms of their offensive statistics, there's no comparison on defense. Defense is half the game. If you ignore defense, you're not really playing basketball, and so it's very easy to pick Jordan over LeBron. Do you see what I did there? Claim, warrant, impact. Claim, warrant. How does it affect the debate? Why does it make you vote for me? Why does it make you write my name in the winner box? That's what impact means. Okay. And the conclusion. This can be very brief. You don't need any big story here. It's just at the end of the speech you say, and for all these reasons, if it's the second time, if the first time you would say, I would urge an affirmative ballot in today's debate, and I stand open for cross-examination.
Voters.
Well, yeah, at the end of the rebuttal, which is what we're going to talk about in a second, we will talk about voting issues. But that's true. But in your constructed, all you have to say, for all these reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot in today's debate and stand open for cross-examination. I don't know why this isn't there twice. I apologize. Someone got copied. So now we'll talk about rebuttal. You must methodically address all of your opponent's points. Judges expect for you to cover all of your opponent's points. This is very important. Unlike a presidential debate, unlike a real-world debate, like a political debate, your judges are going to be doing something called, theoretically, they're supposed to be voting based on tabula rasa. And let me explain what that means. They are supposed to, in theory, come at the round like they are a blank slate, right? They're supposed to judge it based on who does the better job arguing and who makes the better points, as opposed to what they think. The logical extrapolation of that is that the judges cannot refute points for you in their head, right? So if your opponent says something ridiculous but you don't say anything about it, the convention in debate, and this is not written down in the rules, but the convention in debate is that the judge is supposed to treat that as being conceded, right? As though if you don't touch it, the judge is supposed to treat it like you have conceded it. which means that the norm in debate is that you are going to have to touch each one of your opponent's arguments and refute it in the next speech after it's made. Now, fortunately, in IPDA, we're talking about speeches that have 3 or 4 points. It's not super hard to do that. In other forms of debate, it can be. But in IPDA, it's not super hard to do that, okay? But in order to do that, in order to make sure you are hitting all of their points, you have to keep orderly notes, okay? And the way we keep orderly notes in debate is through a process called a flow, okay? Now, I'm going to go over here to the board. Can somebody like turn that camera and like put it on here on the board so people can see? I want you to take out whatever you're writing. If you don't have something, don't worry about it. Your legal pad. Here's how you know a debater from a non-debater. You ready? Yeah, you can put that over there now. Here's how you know a debater from a non-debater. Non-debater, debater. Turn sideways. When you are in a debate round, you're going to take your case off the front and have it as a separate sheet of paper, lay it down, and then you're going to turn the sucker sideways. And the reason you're going to do that is because you are going to turn it into what's called a flow sheet. Okay? I'm going to show you what that is. So let's say that we take a piece of paper and we turn it sideways. Okay? We've got 5 speeches in a debate round. So let's just say this is kind of right. Okay? We're going to have 5 columns, right? 1 for each speech. And then, because we have 2 debaters, we're going to draw a line down the middle for the 2 sides. Okay? On our flow sheet, we may want to label this. This will be the affirmative constructive. This will be the negative constructive. This will be the first affirmative rebuttal. This will be the negative rebuttal. And this will be the 2AR, the second affirmative rebuttal. On this sheet, we are going to outline the cases. And then we are going to follow them throughout the debate as they are rebutted and counter-rebutted and back and forth. Let me illustrate. So let's say you're the negative. When you're the negative, you're going to go ahead and pre-flow your argument here. You're going to put your definitions here. Maybe you have a weighing mechanism. And then you're going to have your first point, and maybe a piece of evidence, your second point, and maybe 2 pieces of evidence, and your third point here. Whatever works for you. You don't have to write them out. You can just write a few words. Because remember, you have your case right there in front of you. Just enough to keep track of what the arguments are, okay? Abbreviations are fine, shorthand is fine, whatever works for you. When your opponent gets up in the affirmative constructive, you're going to start outlining their case. So if they offer definitions, you're going to make a little note for their definitions. If they offer a weighing mechanism, you're going to write that down. And then you're going to put their contention 1 here, if they have any evidence here, contention 2 here, evidence here, and so on, right? And what you're going to do is, you're going to start drawing arrows across the page. Let me illustrate. So let's say you listen to contention 1 and you know exactly what you're going to say. Put a little bracket there, draw a little arrow, and write your note on what you're going to say in response. You see what I'm saying? On contention 2, draw a little arrow, make a little note on what you're going to say in response. Maybe you disagree on a definition. Draw an arrow, make a little note in response. Now when we get
and
up,
if your points can cross-apply to respond to their points,
sure,
you can draw arrows up from what you've already
absolutely. So for example, if we want to cross it, it doesn't have to be surgically precise, but let's say our second contention answers one of theirs, we might just circle it and put it right there. You see what I'm saying? Whatever works for you, okay? This is going to help you keep track of what's going on. Now, once you give your speech, right, you're going to have a little outline here to go from. They're inevitably going to get up and refute what you said, right? Right? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to do a little bracket, that, and we're going to write down what they say. Okay? Let's say, but what if they don't say anything? Let's say on this definition thing you disagreed with them and they didn't say anything.
Draw a big circle.
So then you're going to draw a big circle, and you're going to put a big X for a drop. And we're going to learn later before we go to the tournament, we might learn in the van on the way to the tournament, I don't know, about how to explain a drop. But that's going to mean that they have dropped the argument. In other words, let's pretend that they didn't do it down here. Let's say maybe they did address this one, but they didn't address your response to contention 2. Oh, excuse me. We're going to put a big X. And then we're going to explain to the judge, Judge, their contention 1 was this, and I refuted it this way. They had nothing to say about that, right? So that is a dropped argument. That means they cannot come back later and address it, and you should treat it as being conceded for purposes of this debate. Now, it's going to take a while for you to learn how to do this, and it's going to take even more time for you to learn how to do it in an eloquent fashion. But the basic idea is if somebody doesn't address an argument in their subsequent speech, right, it is considered what we call a dropped argument. And it is your job to explain to the judge, Judge, because my opponent didn't address this argument, they can't come back and touch on it later. That wouldn't be fair, right? So you can treat this as an argument that has been conceded in this debate. And what that means is the affirmative or the negative or whatever should win because blah, blah, blah. And we're going to keep going across the flow, right? Like this. You know, maybe there's a drop here, who knows? Until we get all the way over here. And honestly, on a realistic flow, usually only about 2 or 3 are going to make it all the way over because people are going to start dropping things, but you never know. And that is what a flow looks like, right? It's going to be something that you follow across the round just like that. It will take you time to learn how to do this well. For right now, realize this is not some kind of art form that you have to get perfect. This is just for you, right? I don't need to see it, right? I maybe would like to see it to help you get better at it, but it is just for you to keep track of the arguments so that you don't miss any and you don't drop them, right? Your first tournament, your flows will not be very good. I'm going to tell you right now. But you will get better over time, and you will get better at taking notes, yes.
What do you do? Let's say that you're the affirmative, your opponent's an egg. You bring up a point, they drop it, you say that they drop it, and then in their second speech, then they go over it.
Okay, well, if you are you the affirmative?
Yes.
Well, then you're going to come back at the end and say, first of all, my opponent should not be allowed to come back in his negative and address this because he didn't address it the first time, which means that it was dropped, and you'll explain why. But secondly, even if you do want to consider it, it's wrong, and let me explain why. Right? You'll do a belt and suspenders. You'll say they dropped it, it wasn't addressed, it should be treated as conceded, they should not be allowed to come back and discuss it. But even if you do decide to consider it, Judge, here's why it's wrong.
I mean, if I brought this point up in my first constructive and they did not reply to it in their first constructive, then rebuttal is not the time for them to come up with it because I don't have enough time, it's not fair to me.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end. 4 things I want you to keep up with. Consider the different ways of refuting an argument. This is not an exhaustive list, this is not all the ways, but these are 4 ways in which we can commonly refute arguments. Unsupported, empirically wrong, outweighed, or irrelevant or non-topical. What does unsupported mean? It just means they didn't cite any evidence for it. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't have to cite evidence for everything. I mean, if we say Trump is currently the president, you should not go tell your judge, well, they didn't cite a source for that, so you have to assume that Trump is not the president. No, don't do that, right? But anything that is actually contestable, X causes cancer, so-and-so got over 1,000 rebounds, whatever. Things that are actually not universally known, right? And you will be surprised how often, especially at the novice level in IPDA, people will not cite sources. And you will need to say, basically, my opponent makes this claim, but he doesn't give you any evidence. And in a debate round like this one, you can't just take his word for it. You have to insist on evidence because it wouldn't be fair for you to just assume things for one side and not the other. So because he doesn't have any evidence, you can basically ignore this claim because he didn't give any reason for you to actually believe what he's saying. Right? Unsupported. No evidence at all. Simplest way to refute things, and you will see that. You will see it at some of your opponents. What about empirically wrong? Maybe you have some evidence in your case that shows that it's just incorrect. Maybe they make a claim, and not only is it not true, but you have evidence that shows that it's not true. Yes?
What's stopping people from just making up the source too? Are they actually doing source checking on this?
Rarely. I mean, they will occasionally there will be, you can in theory challenge it. You can write it down and say, I mean, it is something that you can do, but a lot of times, it's not so much like high school where there's like 3 pages of the national manual or about evidence challenges. Honestly, the biggest thing in IPDA that keeps it from getting really bad is informal peer pressure. Because but it works, see, is the thing. Is we don't do that. It usually works. Like, we don't do super fast debate. We don't do like ridiculous, sort of scheming and stuff because there's a really strong informal peer pressure system to not, I'm going to say this, don't get me wrong, to not be the dick program, right?
Well, I mean, I've had people like straight up make up information and I just get up and I say, Judge, I can't bring information in this round. I'm not allowed to bring evidence in this round to tell you that they're lying. But if you think they're lying and I think they're lying, they're probably lying. I mean, you can refute it like that.
Yeah, and we try to maybe stay away from the word lying if we can, but the other side from that, that is exactly right. You can say things to a judge in this debate event that are a little bit more down home than you could in high school. You can say, look, if you think that's implausible, you know, if you think that's a little too good to be true and it sounds ridiculous, frankly, I do too. It sounds pretty ridiculous to me. Is that the strongest rebuttal? No, but can it work? Yes, it can work.
Especially if somebody's completely bringing up bullshit that you know is bullshit.
Well, I probably should have voiced it. But anyway, so
I'm sorry.
It's okay, it's okay. We know you're profane. We know the thing with the profanity. But no, I'm kidding. So is it empirically wrong? Maybe you have evidence that contradicts it. Maybe your evidence is better. Maybe it comes from a more reliable source. Maybe you can say, they cited an article in People magazine, and I cited a double-blind scientific study in the journal Nature, so you can go ahead and look to my evidence, which is stronger, right? You can say my evidence is stronger. Is it outweighed? Maybe the claim that they have is true, but yours is outweighed. Yes, if we did X policy, it would cost $1 billion, but that's outweighed by the fact that it would save 10 million lives, right? Outweigh it. Yes, if we did this, it would make lines longer at the DMV, but that's outweighed by the fact that it would save 10,000 lives per year, right? You outweigh it. It's not that it's not true, it's just that our impacts are more impactful, right? Outweigh it. And then finally, irrelevant or non-topical. So for example, if they come in and the resolution is resolved, LeBron is better than Jordan, and we have all agreed at the beginning this is about basketball, and then in a rebuttal they come in and start talking about how LeBron does all this great charitable work, right? But we've agreed before that it's about basketball, that's irrelevant, right? That sort of thing.
Topicality.
Topicality, just another way of saying it. Cross-examination, I'm going to skip through this. Basically 3 things. I'll say, clarify any points you don't understand. Make sure you know what their major contentions are. Clarify any evidence that wasn't clear. If you don't know what their evidence said, get clear. In other words, if that outline over there on that flow is not clear to you, if you don't know what they said, right? If you don't know what evidence they cited, use your cross-examination time first to get clear on that, because you can't refute what you don't understand, right? You can't refute what you don't understand. And then once you've done that, if you feel like you've got everything clear, maybe you can get your opponent to concede a key point. Maybe, as Luke pointed out, if they seem to be unreasonable about something, you can sort of sand it down a little bit and figure out what they're saying. Maybe they'll even agree and say, hey, I'm not trying to be unreasonable. Or maybe you can just expose how unreasonable they are, right? Maybe you can get them to agree on something. You know, maybe you can say, now earlier in my speech I said that we're talking about at the pinnacle of their career. Would you agree that that's a fair way to do this debate? And I'll say, yeah, sure. That happens a lot in IPDA debate. And you'll be like, great, so we have now narrowed the debate down and we know what we're talking about. That happens a lot in IPDA. You can say, well, so would you agree? Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll agree with that. So the round overview, I will print this and you can look at it. These are basically just I'll send these to you, but these are basically the duties that you have, you know, in each speech in the round in terms of delivering the case and rebuttal. You can sort of see what they are. We'll talk more about them, I guess, at practice next week before we head out. But basically, you know, in the first affirmative, you don't have anything to rebut, so your job is to just get up there and look good and be eloquent and deliver your case. Make a good first impression. In the negative constructive, your job is to both deliver your case and to do a refutation of theirs. So typically, the way a negative rebuttal will go is you'll say, I'm going to first look to my own case and then I'll move on to address my opponent's, right? That's typically how that will work. In the first affirmative rebuttal, the 3-minute speech, you're going to be trying really hard to cover the flow and get everything on there. The negative rebuttal, you'll be summing up with vote. You'll be refuting some more, covering the flow, doing voting issues. And then the after rebuttal is like sealing the deal. We'll talk more about that next week. Finally, how to win. This is important. How to win debates. That's the last slide. Don't do anything to warrant a dumb loss. In other words, make your free throws, right? A big part of success in life and debate is just not sabotaging yourself by doing things that are obviously wrong. A big part of winning basketball games is making free throws. A big part of winning debates is just not sabotaging yourself by doing dumb things. So number 1, don't be a jerk, right? Don't be mean. Don't tell the judge who they'll be voting for. Don't yell. You know, when you say who they're voting for, just say, here's some reasons you can be comfortable voting for us. Don't drop arguments. Address all their points in your rebuttal. Touch on them all. Keep them all in play, right? Do that. Don't fail to strike the obvious losing topic, right? You know, in other words, if there's something really bad on there, don't come back to the prep room with something that's going to be an automatic loss for you. Think carefully and don't make boneheaded mistakes there. Don't waste your prep time and fail to adequately prepare. Don't fail to give clear voting issues. At the end of the debate round, and I guess I should have said this earlier, one of the most important things you need to be doing with the last minute of your last speech is summing up clearly why the judge can feel good voting for you, right? This is called giving them voting issues. So when you have about a minute left in that negative rebuttal or that affirmative rebuttal, you say something like this. So Judge, we've had a great round and a lot of things have been talked about, but what are the reasons you can be comfortable voting for the affirmative? There are going to be 3 simple reasons why you can feel very good. And then you're going to give them the 3 big winners in the round. It's not going to be just reciting your own points or reciting the negative. It's going to be analyzing the round. And let me give you an example of what I mean. Number 1, voting for the app is going to mean saving lives. I gave you a statistic that showed you we're going to save 10,000 lives a year with this policy. My opponent tried to refute it by saying blah, 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 but I pointed out that that was wrong because blah, blah, blah. That means that there is no attack on that statistic left, which means that at this point it is undisputed that the affirmatives policy of blah, blah, blah is going to save 10,000 lives a year. That's reason number 1 to vote for the affirmative. The second reason is that all of the evidence that my opponent gave was from the 1970s and the 1980s. And I showed you earlier the resolution says is. That's in the present tense. That means all of my opponent's evidence is irrelevant because it comes from the relatively distant past. So it doesn't address what this policy is doing today. And for those 2 reasons, number 1, because it's undisputed that the affirmative is going to save lives, and number 2, because my opponent's evidence is not germane because it comes from decades ago and the resolution talks about the present tense, you can be very comfortable voting for the affirmative in today's debate. That is what summing it up looks like, right? You're not just saying, my first contention was awesome. Remember that? Good times, right? You're going to say, you're going to actually break the debate down and analyze it. Know your judge. I highly recommend that when you walk into a round, you just casually say something like, you mind if I ask if there's anything in particular you'd like to see when you judge debate? Right? Because remember, you can have anybody from the coach of the national champions in this event to somebody who is here to get extra credit for their freshman comp class.
And don't just say, what are your preferences?
Oh, I was just about to ask.
Look,
asked for their preferences.
you got to remember, they may not know what that means. The reason we're asking is because this judge may not know. They certainly won't know what's your judging paradigm.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff we say in policy or an LD debate. You're going to want to say it in a way that will be accessible and respectful, right, to someone who's never done this before. The simplest way to do that is saying, you mind if I ask if there's anything you'd like to see when you judge debate? And then when they tell you, do it. If they say, I really like people to follow the flow, then do it. If they say, I don't know, this is my first time doing this, then you can interpret that as, I need to probably slow down and explain everything to them, right? I don't need to use a bunch of debate jargon. Like, you'll know debate jargon by the time you get to about round 3, right, if you don't already. If they say, well, I've never done this before, then maybe you need to think, I probably need to slow down, still be respectful, but make sure I explain everything I'm saying very clearly to this judge, right? There's a different way you debate in front of the national champion coach versus a lay person, right? Give clear, significant impacts. Make the judge's job easy. At the end of the round, be telling them clearly why you win, why you have the stronger points, and you'll probably win. And finally, seal the deal. At the end of the round, like I showed you earlier, don't just repeat your points. Compare them to your opponents and your opponent's case. Explain why, under the weighing mechanism, it's easy for the judge to vote for you, and it's hard to vote for your opponent. Because here's the last thing I want to say. Judges are nice, but they are, like all human beings, lazy. And they want to go back to the judges' lounge where there's free food and Wi-Fi so that they can watch Netflix and eat, okay? And they would rather fill out a ballot that says, AF saves 10,000 lives, AF, than be like, well, the negative had some really interesting points about feminist intersectionality as it intersects with Foucault, but, no offense to intersectional feminism or anything, but like, it's a lot easier if the judge has a simple, clear, direct roadmap. We prevent genocide. we stop the loss of 10,000 jobs. We stop the loss of 10,000 lives. So that's what we want to be getting at. So anyway, I'm sorry I went a little over. I think at this point we now have basically this, an understanding. Y'all are, I know some of you have got to run out the door, so if you've got to run, feel free to go. If you want to stick around and ask questions, stick around. We'll practice next week. Thank you again for your time.